If you thought you knew the truth, think again. This bombshell changes everything for Doug and Joni, and you won't want to miss what Lisa Weiss just announced. After years of silence, she's revealing shocking secrets that could destroy Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb's public image forever. While Doug Weiss was building his reputation as a well-respected Christian marriage counselor, speaking on stage, writing books, and appearing on television, he was the man with all the answers. He was the authority on loyalty, faithfulness, and covenant love, and people looked up to him and trusted him as the model of what a godly husband should be. However, behind closed doors, Lisa was living a reality that Ron didn't match the persona Doug put out to the world. Lisa stood by him for more than 30 years, believing in the mission they were establishing together. She raised their children, took care of their home, and supported him while he traveled to speak about marriage, even though it meant spending most of the time alone. She trusted him and worked to keep their marriage strong, even though she began to feel invisible in her own home. But Lisa's needs and their relationship as husband and wife started to diminish in the background of his expanding public life. Although it was extremely painful, the hardest part was not loneliness, but rather seeing the man she loved stand on stages and instruct others on how to love their wives and fight for their marriages, while he hardly looked her in the eyes. When he returned home, she felt like a ghost, the woman in the background of Doug's story, who was present but invisible, giving up pieces of herself so that he could take center stage. She questioned whether anyone would believe her if she told them what was going on behind the scenes. Doug was so charming and convincing that they were respected for years. Lisa tried to preserve their family's reputation. She prayed, hoped, and told herself that things would improve. She thought that if she could just be more understanding, patient, and supportive, Doug would remember the dreams they shared when they were. In 2024, Lisa found the courage to speak up and shared her story, her pain, and the truth of what her life had been like. It wasn't a story of bitterness, but of clarity, and she spoke calmly but powerfully. Lisa was young, but the distance between them only grew, and she felt herself breaking down, losing the parts of her that once felt alive. She wasn't just losing her husband as she was losing herself. Lisa revealed how she had lived in the background, trying to save a marriage that Doug wasn't fighting for, and how painful it was to watch him teach others about faithfulness while ignoring his own vows at home. I said, "No, Joni, something very bad has happened." And then there was an essay and all of this, "Oh no," and she defended Pete, who was hurt. This completely upended the carefully constructed image that Dad had created. I was shocked by what Joni was telling me, so I begged her to make amends with Jonathan for herself. According to her, Susie was a pathological liar who had made these accusations against a very nice man, the chiropractor, who is now deceased but has a record, and she attacked her. I saw that side of her, and I can only say that it's nothing like the Joni on TV. It's not like that kind of person, but I did see that side of her in the video where she talked about Jonathan running a smear campaign. I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't seen Jonathan running a smear campaign. She wasn't looking for retribution. Instead, she was looking for freedom and the truth and healing for Lisa. Breaking her silence meant reclaiming her voice after years of being silent and invisible. She wanted people to understand that despite someone's flawless appearance on stage, their reality at home can be very different. By sharing her story, Lisa found herself once more reminding women everywhere that they should be seen as valuable and loved, not just in phrases said in front of an audience, but in the private moments at home where love is supposed to be genuine from the heart. Outside of their home, away from the cameras and conference stages, Lisa and Doug Weiss appeared to be the ideal couple. Their smiles, family photos, church events, and carefully planned social media moments made everything appear simple and fortunate. People looked up to them, admiring their marriage and seeing them as an example of what a godly partnership should be. However, behind their home's doors, things were quietly falling apart. Happened with one major argument or one instance of betrayal. Rather, it was the gradual, agonizing drift that occurs when a loved one grows increasingly distant, leaving you to reach for a hand that no longer reaches back. At first, Lisa tried to ignore it because Doug had always been busy developing his counseling practice, giving talks at churches, and appearing on television to discuss marriage and faithfulness. She told herself that it was just a busy season, and that once things were under control, he would come back to her and they would rekindle their relationship. But the hectic seasons never ended. Doug's phone was constantly ringing, and he was always planning the next sermon or the next book. Lisa would wait for him to return home in the hopes of a genuine conversation, a genuine moment of connection, or even just a "I see you" look in his eyes. Instead, he returned home exhausted, distracted, and still shut out of the world. She would prepare dinner, sit across from him, and feel alone at the table. At church, Doug would preach about the value of pursuing your spouse and making them feel loved and appreciated, but Lisa felt that the words were intended for everyone else but her. They would talk about cherishing your wife, and she would feel like an afterthought in the life they had created together. It was like living in two different worlds, and the private world where she was gradually disappearing. She tried to speak up to let him know how lonely she felt, but Doug would nod and say he understood. Then she would go on to the next call, the next meeting, and the next trip itinerary. She would cry in private, telling herself that she needed to be strong and that supporting Doug's ministry meant putting her own needs aside for the greater good, which she wanted to believe they were still working as a team and that they were still in this together, but she felt the distance between them widening every day. Doug wasn't rude, he wasn't yelling or furious, which might have been simpler to deal with, but instead he was absent while physically present, and Lisa felt like she was becoming invisible. They would go to events together, and people would compliment Doug, telling Lisa how fortunate she was to be married to such a godly man. Smile and nod while fighting back tears, wondering if anyone would ever see the truth she was carrying alone. The most difficult part was the confusion. Doug wasn't a villain. He was a man who truly believed in helping others and gave his all to his work, but somewhere along the line, he forgot about the woman who had supported him through it all. Lisa began to doubt her value, wondering if she was asking for too much by just wanting to be seen and loved by her husband. She would remember the long nights when Doug was away, or when he was home, but emotionally distant, when they had dreams of starting a family, raising a family, and serving God together. They would stay up late discussing their plans, laughing about them, and swearing to always put each other first. She would hold on to those memories when she looked at the man sleeping next to her and wondered when he stopped picking her. Lisa's days became years, and she felt like she was fading away. She would take care of the children, manage the household, and help Doug with his expanding ministry, but she felt as though she was fading away. She tried to fill the void by attending church, making friends, and taking care of her kids, but the pain of not being seen by the person who mattered most never went away, and occasionally Lisa would try to rekindle the passion. Spark, she would organize date nights, write him notes, and attempt to discuss their dreams once more. Doug would agree, but his thoughts were constantly elsewhere. He would check emails, take calls during dinner, and discuss work even when she tried to talk about their relationship. Lisa became aware that she was fighting Doug's mission, and she was losing the battle. Lisa wondered if she was being selfish, if she was expecting too much, or if this was just how marriage looked after decades of being together. However, she knew deep down that love shouldn't feel like she was constantly pleading for scraps of attention from the man she loved, and he prayed that God would mend what was broken, hoping that Doug would see her again and that a miracle would occur, would restore their love. But instead, the gap grew until it was evident that Doug's ambition and Lisa's unsaid suffering were causing their marriage to fail. What's worse is that nobody else knew that they were still the ideal couple, the marriage experts, the ones with it all together. Lisa would sit quietly at Doug's events and smile in pictures, clapping when others did, while her heart ached. The collapse was gradual but steady. It was the missed conversations, the lack of affection, the emotional absence that screamed louder than any fight ever could. It was the look in Doug's eyes that said he was somewhere else, even when he was right in front of her. It was the gradual realization that she was living in silence because she was too scared to bring Doug's reputation into disrepute. She was too exhausted to continue acting as though everything was fine behind closed doors. And although Lisa had fought for them, prayed for them, and believed in them, she couldn't save a marriage on her own. Their marriage collapsed not because of a single significant event, but rather because of thousands of little ones that eroded the love they once shared, leaving Lisa alone in a life that had been over for years by the time the divorce came. Appeared flawless on the outside but was hollow on the inside, and in the quiet aftermath, Lisa Weiss was left to pick up the pieces, rediscover who she was without Doug, and find her voice again after years of silence in a marriage that had already ended long before it was formally called off. When Lisa Weiss first learned that Doug had remarried, it was as if she had been hit by a ton of bricks. It wasn't just that he had moved on, but the speed at which it all happened. Doug, the man she had stood by for more than 30 years, was standing next to Joni Lamb saying vows to another woman just months after their divorce papers were signed. It was a shocking but well-polished headline. Doug was a marriage counselor who had dedicated his life to teaching others about marriage, and Joni Lamb was a well-known Christian television host. Their wedding pictures featured happy faces, a joyous ceremony, and social media captions about God's timing and fresh starts. But for Lisa, those images were like knives piercing her as she sat by herself, trying to comprehend how her world had fallen apart so quickly. Lisa had spent decades supporting Doug's calling, raising their family while he traveled, preaching about the sanctity of marriage, preaching about the value of standing up for your spouse, and urging couples to never give up on each other was something she believed in, lived out, and centered her entire life around. Therefore, when Doug moved on so quickly, it felt like a betrayal of everything he had taught. everything they had fought for, and everything she had given up to support. What was even more painful was who had given. He remarried Lisa, who had known Joni for years. She and Doug had moved into the same Christian circles, attending events together, sharing ministry spaces, and running into each other in the Christian media world. Lisa never thought that the woman who had previously been just another conference face would take her place and share the life Lisa believed she would have until the end, when rumors began to circulate, as they always do, wondering whether Doug and Joni had been emotionally connected before the divorce was finalized. Lisa didn't want to believe it, but the timeline was too quick and tidy to feel right. She couldn't answer questions that kept her up at night. Had they been speaking while she was still trying to save her marriage? Had the seeds of this new relationship begun while she was praying for God to heal what was going on in her home? It wasn't just the remarriage, it was the public celebration of the wedding. It was hailed as a God story by members of their community, but Lisa was still trying to put her broken identity back together and find the strength to face each day. Friends who had prayed with her and Doug were now congratulating him, and Joni was posting their blessings online as if she had never been there. Lisa felt invisible, as though her decades of love and devotion had just disappeared from everyone's memory. Lisa recalled sitting in her. Lisa was alone trying to explain to her kids why everything they knew was changing so quickly, while she was scrolling through pictures of Doug and Joni smiling together in the living room, surrounded by people who were happy for them. She watched as Doug and Joni shared their story on television, portraying it as a beautiful testament to God's timing, while her story was ignored and her pain went unspoken. What hurt Lisa the most, though, was the hypocrisy. Doug had spent years counseling couples, telling them to fight for their marriages, be patient, keep their word, and work hard even when it was difficult. However, when it came to their own marriage, he had soon left, moving on to someone else, leaving Lisa to deal with the emotional fallout while he entered a new life without looking back. Lisa's pain wasn't just about losing Doug, it was about losing the future she thought they were creating. She found herself reliving memories of the years they spent together, the dreams they shared, the promises they made, and the prayers they prayed together for. It was about feeling abandoned, replaced, and silenced in a story that had once included her. It was about seeing the man she loved change into someone she didn't recognize, someone who could openly celebrate a new love while she was left mourning the loss of a life they had promised to each other. Their family, she questioned whether any of it had been genuine for him, or if it had all been a prelude to a different life he had been waiting to live. The questions were innumerable, and the answers never materialized. For Lisa, the remarriage wasn't just a headline. It served as a constant reminder that her life had undergone a permanent transformation, and she had to observe as Doug and Joni continued to establish a platform together, garnering recognition and admiration for their new partnership, while she was left to recover in private, away from the cameras and the congrats. It seemed as though the life she had led, the sacrifices she had made, and the love she had given were merely a footnote in Doug's story. But in the quiet moments when the tears would fall, Lisa started to realize something significant. Doug's decisions didn't make her valuable. The speed of his remarriage didn't ruin the decades she had given, the love she had offered, or her faithfulness allowed Doug and Joni to move on and tell their story. But Lisa still had a story to tell, a story of faith, resiliency, and the strength to get back up when it seems like the world has forgotten you. Lisa started to realize that although Doug and Joni's remarriage shocked the world, it also liberated her from the delusion she had been clinging to, enabling her to see that her healing and her future were now in the end. Lisa's story did not end with her shocking remarriage to Joni Lamb. Rather, it was the painful turning point that forced her to rediscover herself, reclaim her identity, and start living a life where she no longer had to disappear so someone else could shine it. Her hands allowed her to mourn what she had lost as she entered a new season where her voice mattered, where she was seen, and where she was no longer forced to live in the shadows of someone else's story. Was the moment when she realized that even in the darkest times there is hope for a fresh start, and that even in betrayal there is a chance to be whole again. When Doug and Joni's marriage went viral, Lisa felt as though her whole life was on display for everyone to judge. Social media posts congratulating the couple were all over the place, and Christian media platforms shared stories about their happy new beginning. Their union was described as a God story by strangers on the internet, who called it a testimony without understanding the anguish and confusion Lisa was going through behind closed doors. For Lisa, losing her husband meant losing her position in the life she had spent decades creating. She had been Doug's ministry partner, the silent supporter who helped him establish his platform, raise their kids, and maintain their home while he traveled and spoke. Regarding faithfulness in marriage, she was now watching as Doug and Joni grinned on TV screens, while her own world seemed to be falling apart in slow motion. Because their remarriage was public, it was more difficult for Lisa to grieve in private, because everywhere she looked, she saw reminders of how swiftly Doug had moved on, and with someone who was already well known in their circles, it seemed as though Lisa's suffering was never seen by anyone else. Story was changed to one that presented Doug and Joni's marriage as a perfect gift from God. But for Lisa, it felt like a betrayal that was being publicly celebrated, while she was left to clean up the emotional rubble in silence. Those who had previously prayed with her and Doug now congratulated him on social media. Friends she believed would support her through the most trying time in her life remained silent out of fear of taking responsibility. As Lisa struggled to find the strength to get out of bed and face each day, church members whispered to her about what actually happened. It seemed like the world had moved on without her, leaving her to deal with a grief that was too heavy to bear alone. Late at night, Lisa would browse through her phone, reading posts and comments, trying to figure out how the man who had preached about fighting for marriage could start a new one so quickly. The hardest times came when Lisa had to explain to their kids why everything had changed so quickly, even though they were old enough to see what was going on, old enough to read the headlines and the social media posts, and old enough to feel the pain. She began to doubt everything she had ever believed about love, faith, and commitment. She felt small, invisible, and incredibly alone, as if her entire identity had been tied to being Doug's wife, and now without him, she didn't know who she was anymore. Lisa tried to shield her kids from the sorrow of seeing their father go so fast, but she could see it in their eyes and hear it in their inquiries about why their father had left and why he was already seeing someone else. It devastated Lisa to see her kids in pain, feeling abandoned, and trying to make sense of a world that felt so unstable all of a sudden. For a while, Lisa was unable to move on, feeling trapped in a moment she couldn't alter, and haunted by Ron. The memories of a life gone by made her miss the man she had once loved, the dreams they had shared, and the family moments that had once felt so safe. There were days when it felt impossible to get out of bed because the burden of betrayal and public shame was too great to bear. But gradually, in the quiet moments, Lisa started to rediscover herself. She took small steps, journaled, and prayed, not just for healing, but also for the strength to continue. Doug's decisions did not determine her value, and his public persona did not conceal the reality of her life. And she began to realize that even if she couldn't alter the course of events, she had a choice in her lifestyle. Going forward,